The most powerful man in the room slammed his hand on the table. Nobody moved. For 7 minutes, the owner of the restaurant had been sitting there without a single glass of water. Then he looked up and saw the waitress. She looked directly at him, turned around, and walked away. The entire restaurant froze, because the man she had just ignored was Park Seo-jin, one of the richest CEOs in South Korea. And the expression on his face said only one thing. Someone was about to lose their job. Someone was going to regret this. But that night, nobody knew that the waitress who ignored him would completely change the billionaire's life. If you love stories about unexpected connections and powerful life lessons, subscribe now and stay until the end because the story only gets better. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand what kind of man Park Seo-jin was. Not the version in the magazines, the sharp suit, the controlled smile, the carefully worded interviews about innovation and legacy. That version was real, but it was curated, designed. A performance so polished it had become second nature. The real Park Seo-jin was the boy who had grown up in a 2-room apartment in Dobong-gu, watching his father come home exhausted every night from a factory job that paid just enough to keep them from falling behind. At 11, Park Seo-jin watched his father come home exhausted from another factory shift. "Eat first," his mother said softly. "I'm not hungry." But he was. He was simply too tired. That night, the boy lay awake and made himself a promise. One day, he would become so successful that nobody in his family would ever have to live like this again. Seo Group had its name on buildings in Seoul, Tokyo, Singapore, and Dubai. And somewhere along the way, the boy who feared powerlessness had become a man who confused power with worth. Who had not, in longer than he could honestly remember, been made to wait for anything. He didn't think of himself as cold. He thought of himself as efficient. His assistant Min Young thought of him differently, though she would never say so out loud. "He's not mean," she told a colleague once, very quietly, in the copy room. "He just genuinely doesn't understand why other people's time matters." That was on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, Park Seo-jin would understand. Kelly Kwame had not planned to be a waitress in Seoul. She had planned to be a chef. That had been the plan since she was 9 years old in Kumasi, Ghana, standing on a wooden stool beside her grandmother, learning that food was not just sustenance. It was language. It was love. It was the thing her grandmother used to say things that didn't have other words. She had come to Seoul on a culinary scholarship at 24, wide-eyed and completely unprepared for how cold a city could feel when you didn't know anyone in it. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover rent, food, transport, or the particular loneliness of being far from home in a place where you stood out in every room you entered. So she waitressed. She waitressed and she studied and she sent money home every month and she told herself it was temporary. A season. Something she was moving through, not stuck in. 2 years later, she was still waitressing. Now at Hanul, which paid better than anywhere else she'd worked. Even if the clientele required a particular kind of patience she had spent months developing. She was good at her job. Genuinely good. The kind of waitress who remembered that the gentleman at table 7 always wanted his tea without the usual garnish. Who noticed when a couple dining together had stopped talking and moved around them quietly. Who could carry 4 plates and a full smile through a crowded floor without spilling a drop. She was also, her supervisor Chai-won had noted privately, the only member of staff who did not visibly flinch when Park Seo-jin walked in. "You're not scared of him?" Chai-won asked her once, genuinely curious. Kelly had thought about it for a moment. "He's just a man," she said simply. "A man who eats dinner." Chai-won had looked at her with the expression of someone watching a person step cheerfully toward a cliff edge. The evening it happened started ordinarily enough. Kelly was covering the VIP section alone. One of her colleagues had called in sick, and the floor manager had redistributed the tables without adjusting the workload. She was managing table 1, 3, and 7 simultaneously, which was fine. She had done it before. Table 7 had a couple celebrating an anniversary. She had already brought their champagne and made a small note to check back in 20 minutes. Table 3 had a businessman and 2 clients, mid-meeting, who needed water refills and bread but otherwise wanted to be left alone. Then table 1 was seated. She saw him come in. That was the thing people always got wrong when they heard the story later. They assumed she hadn't noticed him. She had noticed him immediately. The maitre d's entire posture changed when Park Seo-jin walked through the door. The background noise of the restaurant shifted slightly, the way it does when someone significant enters a room. Kelly noticed. She registered the table. She assessed. And then table 7's champagne flute tipped. Not spilled. Tipped, caught mid-motion by the woman at the table. But in catching it she'd knocked her clutch to the floor and the contents had scattered lip balm, a folded photograph, a small bottle of perfume that shattered against the tile with a sharp, sweet-smelling crack. Kelly was already moving. She reached the table in 4 seconds, crouched down, began gathering the items with quick, careful hands. The woman, late 50s, elegant, clearly embarrassed, was apologizing. Her husband was half out of his chair. "Please," Kelly said quietly, warmly. "Don't worry at all. I have everything." She wrapped the broken perfume bottle in a napkin, gathered the rest, stood and placed the clutch back on the table. "I'll bring a fresh glass. And I'm sorry about the perfume. That was a beautiful scent." The woman's eyes softened. "It was my mother's favorite," she said, slightly surprised that Kelly had noticed. "Then I'm doubly sorry." Kelly touched the edge of the table gently. "Give me a moment." She turned toward the service station. Behind her, at table 1, Park Seo-jin watched her walk away. He had been waiting now for 4 minutes. He said nothing. Yet, by minute 7, he said something. Not loudly. He didn't need to be loud. He had the kind of voice that carried naturally, low, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent 10 years in rooms where people listened the moment he opened his mouth. "Excuse me." Kelly was coming out of the service station with a fresh champagne flute. She heard him. She registered the direction. She looked toward table 7, calculated the 30 seconds it would take to deliver the glass and confirm they were settled, and made a decision. Table 7 first. They'd been waiting longer, and the woman was still visibly flustered. She delivered the glass, said 3 quiet words that made the woman smile, and then turned toward table 1. "Good evening," she said, arriving at his table with the same composed warmth she brought to every table. "I'm sorry for the wait. May I start you with—" "7 minutes," Park Seo-jin said. Not an explosion. Just a fact, delivered with a precision that was somehow colder than anger. 7 minutes, he repeated. I have been sitting at this table for 7 minutes. You looked at me, turned around, and walked away. Kelly held his gaze. Not defiantly, calmly. You're right, she said. And I apologize. There was an urgent situation at another table that needed immediate attention. I came to you as quickly as I could. An urgent situation, he repeated, as if the concept were foreign to him. Yes, I am Park Seo-jin. Yes. And the woman at table 7 was having a difficult moment. Fantastic. I wouldn't change it. Tells us everything. Yes, Kelly said again with the same evenness. And the woman at table 7 was having a difficult moment. Both things can be true at the same time. The silence that followed was the kind that had a texture to it. Park Seo-jin stared at her. Not with rage, with something stranger. Something he couldn't immediately classify. Bring me the tasting menu, he said finally. And water. Still not sparkling. Of course, Kelly said. I'll be right back. She turned and walked toward the service station with the same unhurried step she'd had all evening. At the table beside him, a man who had been pretending to look at his menu let out a breath so quietly it was almost silent. Park Seo-jin did not complain to the manager that evening. That surprised him more than anything else. He sat through his dinner, the tasting menu, 7 courses, each one brought by Kelly with the same quiet professionalism, and he could not find, in any honest corner of himself, a legitimate grievance. She had explained herself. Clearly, without apology for the explanation itself, without the panicked over-apologizing that people usually deployed when they realized who he was. Just a fact. There was an urgent situation. Both things can be true at the same time. He had eaten those words with every course. By the 7th course, A small, perfect piece of chocolate with a gold leaf detail that he would normally have eaten without registering. He found himself watching her work the floor. She moved differently from the other staff. Not faster or slower, but more intentionally. She seemed to notice things before they became problems. A glass getting low before the guest reached for it. A couple whose body language had shifted from comfortable to strained. A child at a nearby table who had dropped a toy and was about to cry. She was, he thought, genuinely good at this. The thought unsettled him slightly. He was not used to being impressed by people in service roles. Not because he thought poorly of service. His father had worked a service job his whole life. But because he moved through restaurants and hotels the way most wealthy people did, registering the experience without seeing the human beings creating it. When she brought the bill, he looked up. "The woman at table 7, he said. "The perfume. Was it resolved?" Kelly looked at him with an expression that was briefly, slightly surprised. Yes, her husband went out during the meal and found a similar scent from a shop downstairs. She was very touched. Good. Then, with the particular difficulty of a man unaccustomed to the words, "You made the right call." Kelly held his gaze for a moment. Something moved in her expression. Not triumph, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The look of someone seeing a person more clearly than the person expected. "Thank you," she said simply. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." He came back 3 days later. His assistant Min Young, who managed his calendar with the precision of a military operation, had noted the reservation with quiet bewilderment. Park Seo-jin did not return to restaurants. He had a list of approved establishments that rotated on a schedule. Hanul was not on the regular rotation. She said nothing. She booked the table. He arrived at 7:15. Table 1 as before. Kelly saw him the moment he walked in. She felt something tighten slightly in her chest. Not fear, but alertness. The animal awareness of a situation that could go multiple ways. She went to his table within 90 seconds. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome back." He looked at her. "You remember me." "I remember all my tables," she said simply. "Still water." Tiny pause. "Yes, thank you." She brought the water. She took his order, the tasting menu again, without her suggesting it. He had clearly decided already. She noted that he'd chosen a different wine than last time, something lighter, and said nothing about it. What happened over the following 90 minutes was something that neither of them could have accurately described afterward. He asked her at the third course about the dish, a detail about the preparation that went beyond the standard explanation on the menu card. She answered him properly, with the knowledge of someone who had spent years studying food, who understood technique and origin and intention. He asked a follow-up question. She answered that too. By the 5th course, he was asking about her, carefully, with the slightly stiff quality of a man who did not ask people about themselves very often. She told him she was a culinary student, that she was Ghanaian, that she had been in Seoul for 2 years, that she waitressed to fund the life she was building toward. He listened in the way she would come to recognize over time, completely without interrupting, with the full weight of his attention, which was, when he chose to give it, a remarkable thing. "Why Seoul?" he asked. "The scholarship," she said. "And because I wanted to learn from a food culture that takes technique as seriously as my grandmother did. Just a different technique." "Your grandmother was a chef?" "She was a woman who cooked every day for the people she loved," Kelly said. "Which I think is a higher qualification than most." Park Seo-jin was quiet for a moment. "My mother was the same," he said, and his voice changed, just slightly, just briefly, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for a long time. If you've ever had someone in your life who showed love through food, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the smallest memories stay with us forever. Kelly looked at him carefully. She didn't push. She simply said, "Then you already know what I mean." He came back the following week. And the week after that. By the 4th visit, Chai-won had stopped pretending not to notice and simply stared openly at Kelly across the service counter. "He's coming for the food," Kelly said flatly, without looking up. "He has a private chef," Chai-won said. "He is not coming for the food." Kelly said nothing. She was not naive. She understood what was happening. She simply did not know what to do with it, because Park Seo-jin was not behaving the way she had expected powerful men to behave. He was not grand or presumptuous or performative. He was, increasingly, just a person sitting at a table, choosing carefully and deliberately to be seen by her. The evening the shift happened was a Thursday. The restaurant had just closed. Kelly was restocking the service station. The last person left on the floor. When the elevator opened and Park Seo-jin walked back in, she turned around. "We're closed." "I know," he said. He stopped a few feet from the service counter, hands in his coat pockets. "I left something." She looked at the table. Nothing there. She looked back at him. He almost smiled. Barely, just at the corner of his mouth. "It's not a physical object," he said. "Then what did you leave?" "A question," he said. "I left without asking it." Kelly set down the cloth she was holding and looked at him steadily. "Ask it." He was quiet for a moment. The city glowed behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. 62 floors of Seoul spread out like a lit map, beautiful and indifferent. "You told me the first evening that both things can be true at the same time," he said. "A man being important and another table needing attention first." "Yes. I've been thinking about that," he said. "For 2 weeks. I've been thinking about that sentence. Because nobody has spoken freely to me. I don't know how long." Kelly was very still. "What's the question?" she asked. "The question," he said, "is whether you would be willing to have a date with me. Not here. Not as my waitress. Just dinner. As 2 people." The silence between them had a quality she hadn't expected. Not tension, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt strangely like honesty. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded once. "That's a fair answer." He walked back to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, he turned. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've never had to ask twice for anything in my life. I find that I don't mind the idea." The doors closed. Kelly stood in the empty restaurant for a long moment, the city glittering behind her, and breathed slowly. She said yes 4 days later. Not because of the power or the money. She had thought about that carefully, honestly, in the way she thought about everything important. Not because of what he could offer her. Because of the window she had seen open in his face when he talked about his mother. Because of the 2 weeks of thinking he had admitted to. Because of a man who, for the first time in probably a very long time, had been made to wait, and had waited, and come back and waited again. The date was in Bukshan Hanok village, at a small restaurant tucked into one of the old alleys that smelled of wood and winter air. No reservation drama, no VIP protocol. He arrived before her and was standing outside in a plain dark coat, looking, she thought, considerably less like the chairman of a 23-company empire and considerably more like a man who was slightly nervous. That detail, more than anything, made her certain she had made the right decision. They talked for 3 hours. About food, her grandmother's kitchen versus his mother's. About Kumasi and Dobong-gu, 2 places that couldn't have been more different and somehow produced 2 people who understood the same thing about what it meant to want more than what you were handed. About loneliness, which he called by a different name, efficiency, and she translated for him quietly, and he listened. At some point near the end of the meal, he said, "You're the first person in years who has spoken to me like I'm a person and not a position." Kelly looked at him across the table. "You are a person," she said simply. "You just forgot. This is the part of the story where everything changes. If you're still here, and I hope you are, drop a fire in the comments right now. Because what happens next is the part most people never expect." The world did not respond kindly to what was growing between them. It never does when 2 people from different worlds choose each other. The first pressure came from within Seo Group's board, quiet, careful, delivered through intermediaries, as these things always are in rooms where people don't want fingerprints on what they're saying. "There are questions," Min-young told him, standing in his office doorway with the look of someone delivering news they didn't want to deliver. "About the optics. The board members who spoke to me were concerned about." She searched for words. "The perception." "The perception," Seo-jin repeated. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "Tell them," he said, with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who had not become what he was by caring what boards thought of his personal life, that the perception is not their business. The second pressure came from his aunt. His father's sister, sharp and loving in the particular way of women who have watched a family struggle and blamed outsiders for it. "I heard about the girl," she said, over the phone, using a tone that contained a small family history of fear and protectiveness compressed into 3 words. "Her name is Kelly," he said. "I know her name." "Then use it." His aunt was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not against her, Seojin. I don't know her. I'm afraid for you." "I know," he said, and his voice softened. "I'm not afraid." "You've never been afraid of anything," she said. "That's not always a good thing." The third pressure was the hardest. It came from a journalist, a business reporter who had been circling CO Group for years, looking for anything that could be shaped into a story. He found the relationship and he shaped it not into a love story but into a question about judgment, about whether a CEO's private choices reflected on his professional decisions. The article ran on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it had been shared widely enough that Kelly saw it on her phone during a break between classes. She read it twice. Then she put her phone face down on the table and sat very still for a long moment. She thought about her grandmother, about wooden stools and the smell of Kantemeyer stew and a woman who had built a life's worth of love out of ordinary ingredients. She thought about what she had come to Seoul to become. And she thought about a man standing outside a restaurant in Bukshin in a plain coat, looking slightly nervous, because for the first time in a long time something mattered enough to make him nervous. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered before the second ring. "I saw it," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for someone else's choices. Are you okay?" He was quiet for a moment, and she could hear, in the quality of the silence, that the question had surprised him, that he had been preparing for a different kind of call, a harder one. "I'm fine," he said. Then, "I'm better now." "Good," she said. "Then don't let it become anything bigger than it is." "It won't." "Seojin." "Yes. I didn't come to Seoul to be frightened out of things that matter. Just so you know." Another silence, this one different, warmer. "I know," he said. "That's why He stopped, started again. "That's one of the reasons." She almost smiled. "Finish that sentence one day." "I will," he said. "Soon." The journalist's article faded within the week, consumed, the way these things are, by the next story, the next controversy, the appetite of the news cycle that had already moved on. What didn't fade was something quieter and more permanent. Park Seo-jin began, slowly and with the particular difficulty of a man rewiring habits built over 10 years, to change. Not dramatically, not suddenly, the way rivers change landscapes, gradually, persistently, in ways you only notice when you look back at the distance covered. He started eating dinner at a reasonable hour. He started, in board meetings, asking questions that began with how will this affect rather than what will this return. He called his aunt more often. He visited his mother's grave, something he had avoided for years because it made him feel, he had always told himself, inefficient. Standing there in the quiet of a Seoul cemetery on a Tuesday morning, he understood for the first time in a long time that grief wasn't inefficiency. It was evidence of love. And love, which he had spent 20 years structuring his life to avoid needing, was not, as it turned out, a weakness. He had needed someone to show him that. She had shown him by refusing to be impressed by anything except the parts of him worth being impressed by. A year after the evening he had sat at table 1 and waited, furious, unaccustomed, certain that someone was going to regret existing. Park Seo-jin stood in the kitchen of a small restaurant in Mapogu that had not yet opened. Kelly stood beside him, reading through a list of suppliers, a pen behind her ear, flour on her sleeve from a morning spent testing a menu she had been building in her head for 2 years. The restaurant was hers. The name above the door was hers. The concept, a fusion of Ghanaian and Korean flavors rooted in the idea that food was language, love, the thing that said what other words couldn't, was entirely, completely hers. He had made it possible, yes. He would never pretend otherwise, and neither would she. But he had not designed it. He had not directed it. He had simply opened a door and stood back and watched what walked through it. Which was, she had told him once, the most powerful thing a powerful person could do. "You're going to be nervous," he said, looking at the kitchen. "I'm always nervous," she said, without looking up. "I just don't let it make decisions for me." He smiled, a real one, the kind that had taken her months to see and that she now considered one of the most reliable things in her world. "You know," he said, "that evening at the restaurant, when you walked away from my table." She looked up. "Yes. I was furious. I know. I was wrong. I know that too." He laughed, quietly, honestly. "You don't let anything go easily." "Neither do you," she said. "That's why you're good at what you do." She put the supplier list down and looked at him properly. "And it's why you eventually figured out that sitting in a room, demanding to be the most important thing in it, was making you lonely." He held her gaze. "It was. And now." He looked around the kitchen. At the equipment being installed, the menu she'd written and rewritten a dozen times, the morning light coming through the window of a place that was entirely the product of someone else's dream given room to grow. "Now," he said simply, "I'm in the most important room in Seoul." She considered that for a moment. Then she handed him the supplier list. "Good. Then make yourself useful." Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be the most important person in every room they enter. They build walls they call success, and they sit behind them wondering why nobody real ever gets through. And then one day, if they're lucky, someone walks away from them. Not out of disrespect, not out of weakness, but because there was someone else who needed attention more. And in that small, ordinary moment of being made to wait, the wall develops its first crack. Not every powerful person survives that crack. Not every one of them looks at it honestly and asks, "What is this telling me?" But the ones who do, the ones who sit with the discomfort of being uncatered to, who go back and ask the question they were too proud to ask the first time, those are the ones who become something worth being. Park Seo-jin had built an empire out of refusing to be powerless. Kelly Kwame had built a life out of refusing to let other people's power determine her worth. And somewhere between a 7-minute wait and a flour-dusted kitchen in Mapogu, they had built something neither of them had on any blueprint. Something that didn't have a name in any business model. Something that felt every morning like the best decision either of them had ever made. If the story moved you, if it reminded you of something true about patience, dignity, and the people who show up in unexpected ways, subscribe to this channel right now. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. A year earlier, Park Seo-jin had been furious because a waitress made him wait 7 minutes. Now he would gladly wait a lifetime if it meant spending it beside her. Because sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one who serves you first. It's the one who teaches you that the world doesn't revolve around you. They're the ones that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.